argument against the resurrection is simple. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The purported resurrection of Jesus is about as extraordinary as a claim can get. The evidence in favor of the resurrection is not good, so we shouldn't believe it. It is just a matter of common sense that we should place a high burden of proof on extraordinary claims. Suppose I had opened this talk by saying, I just flew in from Chicago, and boy, are my arms tired. Surely you would demand very good reason indeed before you regarded this as anything other than an ancient joke. Suppose that the Reverend Billy Graham solemnly assured you that the cow in the nursery rhyme really did jump over the moon. Surely you would demand hard evidence for such an outrageous claim, even coming from so respected and trustworthy a source. Once more then, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So why do I say that the alleged resurrection of Jesus was so extraordinary? Well, surely if we know anything about the world, we know that dead people tend to stay dead. Otherwise, why should we see irony in the following notice from our Department of Social Services? Dear sir, you will no longer receive food stamps because our department has received word of your death. You must inform us in writing within 30 days if there is a change in your circumstances. Sorry, folks. Why are the reports of Elvis sightings material for the supermarket tabloids? Because we all rightly are very skeptical of reports of the resuscitations of corpses. The New Testament reports of Jesus' post-mortem appearances are even more extraordinary. Jesus was supposedly resurrected, not just resuscitated. His supernatural resurrected body could suddenly appear and disappear and pass through solid walls and doors into closed rooms. Surely a resurrected Jesus would be far more extraordinary than even a resuscitated Elvis. Here you might respond, wait a second, Parsons. Of course you atheist, are extremely skeptical of the resurrection. Like other unbelievers, you reject the whole concept of the miraculous, and you display a touching faith in the so-called laws of nature. I, however, you might say, believe in a God who can alter or suspend such laws at will. After all, the laws of nature don't tell us how things must behave, only how they usually do behave, unless, that is, God chooses that they behave differently. Therefore, you might say to that evil atheist, Parsons, I do not have to rate the plausibility of miracle reports nearly as low as you do. But even if you believe in God, and even if you believe that miracles do occur, you must admit that the truth of any particular miracle report is initially most unlikely. After all, miracle reports come a dime for a dozen. Hucksters and hoaxers abound, as do false prophets and false religions. So there will be very many specious miracle reports. As a glance at the New Age or occult section of any bookstore shows you, humans have a strong inclination to believe the extraordinary over the mundane. This is why we must repeatedly inculcate the maxim, when you hear hoofbeats in the distance, think, aha, horses, not aha, unicorns. So, whether we are theist or atheist, our initial attitude towards any particular miracle claim must be that it is extremely implausible. This does not mean that evidence cannot, in principle, establish a miracle claim. It doesn't even mean that human testimony can never establish such a claim. It does mean that the burden of proof on miracle claimers must be very heavy.
Well, here we come to the central miracle of the New Testament, the resurrection of Jesus. And Dr. Parsons says, first, you've got to bear a very heavy burden of proof, Dr. Craig, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is a watchword of the free thought movement today that I always hear repeated. But when I think about it, I can think of almost no justification for that principle. I do not think it is true that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. As Thomas Sherlock pointed out in his book on the resurrection of Jesus, it doesn't take extraordinary evidence to establish that someone is alive. That's easy to do. Nor does it take extraordinary evidence to establish that someone is dead. That's accepted in any court of law. But to prove the resurrection of Jesus, all you need is good testimony that somebody was alive, and then he was dead, and then he was alive again. So I don't see that extraordinary events do require extraordinary evidence. The germ of truth in this statement, however, I think, is that certain explanations are not the best explanation because they're ad hoc, they're contrived. That's the problem with saying, oh, I saw someone flapping his arms and flying about the room. It's that is an ad hoc explanation. It's contrived. There are better explanations than that. So the question is, when you come to the resurrection of Jesus, is the best explanation a supernatural explanation or a naturalistic one? And I contend it is not ad hoc to appeal to a supernatural explanation in this case, because of the religio-historical context in which that event occurred. The resurrection of Jesus is not just the resurrection of someone or anybody. It's the resurrection of Jesus, who claimed to be the absolute revelation of God, who made these remarkable claims that Dr. Parsons referred to. It comes as a climax of his own unparalleled life and teachings, and is, as it were, a divine vindication of those radical claims to be the Son of God and the revelation of God to mankind. And therefore, this explanation, I think, is not ad hoc or contrived. On the contrary, it fits like a hand in a glove into the life and teachings of Jesus. Well, what about the specific evidence? Dr. Parsons inveighs against the Gospels on several grounds about how they're based on oral tradition and so forth. But at the end of the day, the fact is that compared to other sources of ancient history, the Gospels compare very well. R.T. France, who is a New Testament scholar, writes, "At the level of their literary and historical character, we have good reason to trust the Gospels seriously as a source of information on the life and teaching of Jesus. Ancient historians have sometimes commented that the degree of skepticism with which New Testament scholars approach their sources is far greater than would be thought justified in any other branch of ancient history. Indeed, many ancient historians would count themselves fortunate to have 4 such responsible accounts written within a generation or two of the events and preserved in such a wealth of early manuscript evidence." And then listen to what he concludes. "The decision as to how far a scholar is willing to accept the record they offer is likely to be influenced more by his openness to a supernaturalistic worldview than by strictly historical considerations." In other words, skepticism about the Gospels, let's face it, is not rooted in their historical and literary quality, which is very good. It's rooted in an anti-supernatural bias, and I think that that's been evident in Dr. Parsons' own remarks tonight.